Reno has a bad transit system. I don't take the bus because oftentimes it is faster and more intuitive for me to just take my scooter whenever I want to go anywhere. I doubt this will be changed in the foreseeable future. There have only been a few noteworthy changes to the transit system, but it's usually undermined by scaling back on other routes. Not only is service not getting any better, it is arguably getting worse. As of September 10th, RTC has permanently discontinued 3 of their routes due to a lack of ridership. It genuinely bothers me when service has to be reduced or gutted entirely, blaming a lack of ridership, with nothing to diagnose why ridership is low. According to a report RTC published last July, there were 3.56 million rides from August 2021 to July 2022, which is 56% fewer trips than in the same time period in 2019. This drop in ridership is concerning because transit agencies are funded based on how much ridership they have. Fewer riders means they may not be able to secure enough funding to continue normal operations. RTC provides several historical reasons for these trends. One major contributor is the COVID-19 pandemic. Since March 2020, transit agencies nationwide have observed people shifting away from transit into alternative modes or working from home to avoid congregating in places where they may contract the virus. Even as we are coming out of the pandemic, ridership has yet to recover to pre-pandemic levels. I do want to take the time to highlight several other questionable explanations that RTC provided. One reason says, while we experienced a ridership increase from the economic recovery, continued employment provides people with sufficient income to buy and drive cars. There are a few other points like this where declining ridership is blamed on poor people getting cars, as if RTC believes only poor people take the bus, and once they get a car, they no longer have a reason to use public transit. Everyone benefits from having a reliable network of trams, buses, and trains to get people around. It is a vehicle that you aren't responsible for fueling, maintaining, or even driving. You just get on it and it takes you somewhere without any of the misfortunate events that may happen when driving. If the transit system is robust enough that nobody is inconvenienced by using it, then it has accomplished its goal of providing quality transportation for everyone. In the words of Gustavo Petro, a developed country is not a place where the poor have cars. It's where the rich use public transportation. RTC also places the blame on rideshare services and delivery services such as Instacart and DoorDash. They say people with mobility challenges may prefer online shopping and food delivery. I find it to be rather disingenuous to suggest that it's a matter of preference, as if there are no external factors for why people with limited mobility may prefer to use or have to use these services. My favorite explanation is the one that says, young people no longer hang out physically as much as they prefer to socialize using social media. Can you really blame young people for not wanting to be in these places? A car isn't going to run you over in a Discord server. Meanwhile, crossing the street is the most dangerous thing people routinely do. I don't want to pile on or sound belligerent here, but it's not a good sign when an official report from a transit agency explains declining ridership like this. It gives the impression that RTC doesn't understand how their service has failed to accommodate the people around Reno. While it is easy to complain about hourly buses that get stuck in traffic and places that don't have service whatsoever, it's not actually enough to have a bus and a sign to attract more riders. In addition to having frequent, reliable service, the bus stops must be surrounded by places people live and places people want to go to. Oftentimes, that is the piece that is missing. The area within a short walk of a transit line is called a walkshed. This land is incredibly valuable, and it must be developed in a way that supports the transit line. This means the built environment must encourage people to get out of their cars and traverse the area either by foot or by public transit. Every single route in Reno suffers from a fundamental problem where the walkshed is not developed in a way that supports the transit line. Instead, the car infrastructure is built first and the transit is layered on top of it. Even the bus route that captures the most ridership, Route 1 and the Rapid Virginia line, is hindered by the amount of parking lots and stroads that fill the walkshed. Before delving into the meat of this video, I do have to talk about why there are two buses that serve almost the same route. At first, it seems awfully redundant. There is a fascinating story here, and by fascinating, I mean really dumb. Originally, there was only one bus route running along Virginia Street, and it was Route 1. This route was pretty good, with high frequency and overnight service. This all changed when someone had a harebrained scheme for making the buses go faster. The plan was to place special bus stops in locations that represented 60% of Route 1's ridership, which is why you see these fancy platforms. Here's the thing though, you don't make a bus faster by reducing how many times it stops. You make it faster by not having it share traffic with other cars. The amount of time a bus spends stopped is negligible compared to the amount of time the bus spends stuck in traffic. Since the Rapid only stopped at the special platforms, Route 1 was changed to the Rapid Connect route. This functions similarly to the existing route, but it was changed to run at a lower frequency with buses every half hour. This essentially slowed down transit riders because getting to certain stops required them to wait longer for a more infrequent bus or take the Rapid and get dropped off at a place that is a longer walk away from their destination. Eventually, RTC decided to get rid of the Connect route and revert it to Route 1. So now Virginia Street is stuck in an awkward position where it has two buses with essentially the same routes, but different stops. It leads to a lot of confusion. New transit riders may not know which stops are for which bus, and new drivers may not know which stops they are really supposed to stop at. You could be waiting at a bus stop thinking the next bus is going to pick you up, and then it flies past you. This exact scenario happened while I was getting B-roll ready for this video. The man in the white shirt was waiting at the Route 1 stop, the bus didn't stop for the Route 1, it stops for the Virginia line. So he had to chase the bus down, even though there's no reason this can't be one stop. It's a mess that RTC never really fixed. I know I sound bitter here, but it's annoying when RTC says they cannot expand transit despite there being a trivial solution right here. All they have to do is consolidate the stops along Virginia Street and get rid of the redundancy, then move the leftover buses to another part of town where there isn't any transit. This is something that could be changed practically overnight. It's a matter of drawing a map, setting up some signs, and telling drivers where to go and telling people where to expect the bus. For the sake of fairness, speeding up the buses is actually a good way to improve ridership. As stated in the Downs-Thompson paradox, traffic will only get progressively worse until it becomes faster to take the bus. RTC had the right idea, just the worst execution imaginable. In addition to consolidating Route 1 and the Rapid, RTC should give more priority to the buses with the use of bus-only lanes. There are already a few of them, but they are fairly disjointed. For example, there is a bus-only lane across from the Pepper Mill, but there isn't one on the other side of Virginia Street. It would be better to have contiguous bus-only lanes that stretched across the entirety of Virginia Street from Meadowood Mall to 4th Street Station. The buses should also be granted more priority at each of the stoplights. This is sort of the case here where the bus is allowed to go first and then the rest of the cars a few seconds later. This should also be the case along other parts of Virginia Street to ensure the bus and its riders aren't getting stuck behind red lights. When the difference between taking the bus and driving a car is stuck in traffic on a bus versus stuck in traffic in a car, most people will choose their own car. Giving the buses priority at the intersections would help convince more people to use transit, since it would be a faster method of getting to their destination. And people would also have a more positive opinion of transit because if the buses aren't getting stuck in traffic, they are more likely to arrive at the intended times listed on their timetables instead of the bus constantly being late. After the buses have been granted priority, RTC should work towards addressing the poor land use that inhibits people from walking to the bus stops and riding transit. When taking a stroll down Reno's busiest transit corridor, it quickly becomes apparent that the best bus route is merely a Stroad that happens to have bus rapid transit. Starting with the Meadowood Mall transfer station, this area is horrendous. The transfer station is essentially stamped in the middle of all this car infrastructure, with no easy ways for pedestrians to access it. While cars get plenty of access points along the ring road, pedestrians have only one sidewalk with a marked crossing that leads up to the mall, and a bunch of other disjointed sidewalks that surround it. People living in the homes to the north of the transfer station must cross the Stroad, walk down Neal Road, mosey on over to the one entrance with a marked crossing, and then meander towards the transit station. They could also cross the ring road that wraps around the mall and cut through the parking lot. People living in the apartments to the south have to do essentially the same thing. The quickest way of getting to the transit station is walking out to the driveways, crossing a ring road, and then walking through a lot to get to the bus stops. It's like this place was intended to be reached by driving, and any alternative is neglected. If someone has to drive to reach a bus stop, there is already a problem because they could just keep driving to their destination. Venturing out from Meadowood Mall, the next apparent issue is the nature of Virginia Street. As mentioned earlier, it's not much of a street, whereas a Stroad. Streets and roads are two different concepts that serve antithetical purposes. A street is a complex ecosystem that values human interaction. There are going to be a lot of people around, so the traffic is supposed to be slow. Everything in a street should be built around the scale of people, because this is the space where someone is expected to be outside of their cars and going into the various places that are around the street. A road, on the other hand, is the opposite of a street. It is a high-speed connection between 2 points. It should minimize complexity and have few entrances and exits because the priority is moving cars from place to place. A road isn't really anywhere, it's just a means of getting somewhere. A Stroad is an amalgamation of streets and roads. Much like a road, it tries to quickly move a high volume of vehicles by offering a number of wide, forgiving lanes to encourage driving at high speeds, and also having other freeway-like geometry, such as signs that are meant to be seen while in a car, and slip lanes so drivers can easily turn without slowing down. Much like a street, it has a lot of complexity with the surrounding buildings, parking lots, sidewalks, and painted bike gutters. The issue is, it's a terrible street and a terrible road. It's bad at moving vehicles because the complexity is constantly slowing down other cars and leading to many different points of conflict, which adds unnecessary dangers between cars and other vehicles and cars and other pedestrians. It's a terrible street because nobody really wants to be outside in these places. Most of someone's interactions with a Stroad is going to be either driving through it or parking somewhere and walking into the nearby buildings. It is especially unpleasant for transit riders because Stroads are places for cars and not people. If someone is waiting for the bus in an environment like this, they are breathing in polluted air and listening to the constant sound of tires rolling on asphalt. It's not a pleasant place to wait 10 to 15 minutes for the next bus. Nobody comes to a Stroad to pass the time, so those 10 minutes end up feeling much longer because the only thing someone wants to do when at a Stroad is to leave the Stroad. Some bus stops along Virginia Street don't even have anything to shelter people from the rain or to provide shade in the summer heat, making it an even more uncomfortable place to wait. Walking between the bus stops and the surrounding locations is equally unpleasant. Stroads effectively chop the walkshed in half by creating a river of cars that cannot easily be traversed. If someone's destination is across the street, they may have to walk all the way to the nearest stoplight, cross, and then walk all the way back. This may not sound like a big deal, but there are numerous points of conflict where a pedestrian has to carefully watch out for other cars to avoid getting run over. At each of the driveways, drivers may pull up as close as they can to the Stroad as possible, blocking the crossing so someone has to weave around them. The driver may not even look towards the pedestrian as their eyes are glued to oncoming traffic, making it more dangerous to cross in front of the car than behind. However, when crossing behind, drivers who are turning into the driveway may not see the person either. Once someone reaches the stoplight, they may have to wait up to several minutes for the signal to allow people to cross. Even when they are cleared to cross, vehicles may be able to continue making left or right turns, cutting off the pedestrian. Alternatively, someone could cross at a mid-block crossing like this one, but some drivers tend to take the flashing lights as a suggestion to stop and not a requirement. So the person crossing has to watch out along each of the lanes to make sure the driver's actually stopped. It is mentally exhausting to stay hyper-aware of your surroundings to avoid getting run over by a vehicle. If someone has to drive to safely get to their destination, they are going to drive because that's the only comfortable way to get around. Even if the destination is a close walk from the transit stop, it may not be a pleasant walk either because people tend to be dumped onto the car infrastructure as they have to walk through a parking lot to get to the building. It would be better if the buildings were either placed closer to the sidewalks or if there was more paths for pedestrians to walk from the transit station to the building. It is hard not to feel neglected as a transit rider when there is no infrastructure to support someone crossing the street or walking to the buildings that surround a parking lot. Making it easier for transit riders to walk around would be a great step to improving ridership. Various studies have found a correlation between walkability and transit use. In 2007, the Mineta Transportation Institute published a report titled "How Far, by Which Route, and Why?" This report surveyed transit riders and found the primary consideration for choosing a route to a transit station is minimizing time and distance. Secondary factors include safety, attractiveness of the route, sidewalk quality, and the absence of long waits at traffic lights. Essentially, if people are given a direct, pleasant route that is safe from vehicle traffic, they are more likely to walk greater distances to the bus stops. With this in mind, improving ridership begins with turning Virginia Street into a proper street. The priority of Virginia Street needs to be the safety and the activity of people, along with the flow of buses over the movement of car traffic. Virginia Street needs to be the kind of place that is inviting to pedestrians, so when someone gets off the bus, they feel like they're in an area that they belong. The city should reduce the number of lanes, relinquishing space from cars so there can be bus-only lanes, wider sidewalks, or elevated bike paths to make alternative modes of transit feel more welcome. There must also be other changes such as slowing down the traffic with traffic calming and raised crosswalks, among other changes such as getting rid of right turns on red, removing slip lanes, and adding leading pedestrian intervals to the different crossings. Some of these changes do happen in Midtown. Traffic moves a lot slower because there are fewer lanes, and it does feel like there is more density since the buildings are placed closer to the sidewalks. These kinds of improvements should be expanded further south of Midtown, so more of Virginia Street can feel like an actual street where people can willingly traverse the built environment without their cars. These changes should also extend to Meadowood Mall, with contiguous sidewalks and ample crossings to make pedestrians feel like they are actually invited to walk from the transit station to the surrounding areas, and vice versa. Once Virginia Street has been converted into a street, it can function as a platform for building wealth. The next step would be to densify the areas nearby the transit stops with places people live and places people want to go to. As stated in the book, Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, if you desire transit, you must focus on building a productive place, somewhere where people want to be outside of an automobile. Strong Towns uses Union Station in Springfield as a specific example of a location that should begin turning its parking lots and derelict buildings into productive developments serving the needs of that place. Reno can do the same as well. A lot of the land surrounding Meadowood Mall and the Atlantis Casino Resort is wasted on copious amounts of free parking. The city should reclaim this space and work towards converting the many parking lots around Virginia Street and Meadowood Mall into more meaningful developments that attract people to the transit line. Density and transit have a codependent relationship. You can't have density without transit because when everyone drives, there must be ample space for everyone to leave their car. This further separates buildings across greater distances and reduces the amount of land that can be developed into something that supports the walkshed. Similarly, you can't have transit without density. Otherwise, there won't be enough locations to attract people to the area and to use the transit line. These empty parking lots must be developed into homes, stores, eateries, and other kinds of places that make people want to live along Virginia Street and take the bus to other places worth going to. As the number of homes and amenities that surround the transit stops increase, more people will actually take transit instead of their cars. This exact trend was observed in the study Access Walking Distance, Transit Use, and the Success of Transit-Oriented Development in North York City Center. This study analyzed a low-density suburb of Toronto over a 15-year period, and found that focused developments within a convenient walking distance of rapid transit service leads to a shift in travel behavior towards increased transit use and away from automobile use. As population density and dwelling density increased from 1986 to 2001, auto use and ownership decreased while subway use increased. This study concludes that maximizing ridership requires developments to be concentrated within a reasonable walking distance of transit. When doing so, strong transit use is observed for not just the AM peak, but throughout the rest of the day as well. This is why it is important to develop the walk shed in a way that supports the transit line. The reason RTC has been bleeding riders is because they haven't developed the transit corridor for people who actually use transit. Now that ridership has dropped significantly since 2019, it is more important than ever to radically change Virginia Street so it can be somewhere more substantial than a Stroad that happens to have bus rapid transit. Route 1 and the Rapid Virginia line is already a good start because the route is frequent enough that you're never waiting for too long, and the stops are dotted up and down Virginia Street in places where it is easy to understand where the bus goes. However, this should not be the final goal. The next step should be prioritizing the developments around Virginia Street in a way that convinces more people to abandon their cars and instead take public transit. This means pedestrianizing areas around Virginia Street and densifying the parking lots with more meaningful developments that add value to the transit line. As stated in Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, unlike auto-based transportation investments, transit can actually deliver on supporting broad-based wealth creation within a city, and it can provide other benefits such as reducing carbon emissions so the air quality around the transit route is nicer, and increasing social equity by allowing more people to access all of their necessities without the need for a car. If RTC stops treating transit as an alternative for poor people until they can afford a car, and starts treating it as a wealth multiplier that can be used to create more nice places, Virginia Street could be transformed into a much more desirable place with plenty of walkable mixed-use communities and other places that are more meaningful than what Virginia Street represents now. Because good transit isn't really about having a rapid bus every 10 to 15 minutes. It's about creating places that people feel like they belong outside of an automobile, places where people want to traverse either on foot or by transit.